late morning. I'm a little late on this, and actually, I'm not just late in the day, I'm late by 2 days. On the 14th is a feast of St. John of the Cross. And honestly, it took me a while to think about what to say. It's this amazing fellow. Now, I've told you or shared with you that my favorite saint is Saint Teresa of Avila. She was a Carmelite nun who went and became descalzed, or started like a whole new reform in her order to have a more strict but a more spiritual and prayer-filled approach to convent living. When she was 55, she encountered and met a young priest, Father John of the Cross. Now, Father John is the one who we're celebrating, but he was, I think, about 25 or 26 when he ran into St. Teresa of Avila, or Sister Teresa, and he was just taken aback. He had been thinking about leaving his order, the Carmelites, to go to something a little more spiritual than what he was experiencing with them. And she convinced them that, oh no, you can just change your order. So he became a descalzed Carmelite also. This is like a whole stricter approach, so to speak. Descalzed, referring to the fact of without shoes. And they wore sandals. They didn't go shoeless. But in the course of this, he was very enthusiastic. And he learned from Teresa of Avila. I'm not sure the exact year here, but they were together for 3 or 4 months where she taught him about her prayer life. Now, he was her confessor, but in fact, he is her student in terms of learning. And he learned so well, and he just got so enthused that he started a small monastery of these new-style Carmelites, and he got people to follow him in very short order. So he was in charge of this new kickoff of the order that wasn't really separate from the Carmelites, but it was distinct from them. And this grew and grew, and he had gotten popular. He had I think there's almost 300 monks. I'm not sure if they're all priests or not, but there's 300 of them living in this monastery, and I think he started 1 or 2 more. But in the course of things, between this kickoff of a new group and the old group, and there was a king involved in trying to set up how all the religious should operate. Back then, it was very much involved like that. And this is in Spain. In Spain, you have to realize back in what is his years, 1542 to 1591, the Inquisition is still a very big thing. So when Teresa wrote, she had to be very concerned that the Inquisition wouldn't arrest her for saying something unorthodox. Well, John, too, was under a lot of persecution and suspicion. And in those days, without cell phones, without things like this, Instagram or whatever type of social media we convey on, they could easily get in some pretty serious misunderstandings. So between the Carmelite head, which was quite off in, I think it was in Italy, and this king in Spain, and in this group, there became some miscues. These miscues became so serious that they came and they knocked on the door and they arrested St. John of the Cross. And so he went off. They held him for a few days in just a cell in the monastery, and decided that wasn't secure enough. So they transferred him to a different monastery where there was a room. It was 6 foot wide by 10 foot long. That's as small a size as it was. And there was barely any light in there at all. There was a crack up in the ceiling between the wood planks, and from there a small amount of light came in. And he was held there for 9 months. At times he was tortured. At times he was given just bread and water. He struggled a lot. But throughout this time, he prayed. He had a breviary, and so he prayed that prayer, but he also prayed very deeply, and he composed in his mind. He was composing poetry about some of the beauties that he had experienced in life, and kind of brought those beauties into his mind and into his soul right there in this dark prison cell. And later a jailer let him have some paper and pen, and he recorded some of these poems. He will go on in his life to explain a lot about the spiritual life, by kind of exploring his poetry. So there are not a lot of poems. I think there's a dozen or so, maybe less. But he wrote these poems, and they're very, had a lot of symbolism to them in terms of how we approach God. Now, after 9 months, he escapes, and he gets gone, and he's off to one assignment and then another, but he's basically out of trouble, and he's put in charge of a series of them again, made a abbot or whatever they call the head of the monks at a particular place. And so he's rising up, and he has these responsibilities, but the whole time, his emphasis is really on prayer, and he prays really intently and makes tremendous progress. He is sought by almost all the people around him. Obviously, Sister Teresa originally, but now a whole series of nuns and a lot of priests and a lot of lay people would come to him as a confessor and get spiritual guidance from him. And they felt, all of them had this feeling like, whoa, there was like a settling of the heart. Now, John, throughout his life, will go on, and he suffers a bit from here and from there, from this imprisonment and from other things. Never did he blame anyone else. He just said it's all the providence of God, and God will work this out. This is all a part of God's plan. He didn't hold a resentment. At the very end of his life, he has an infection, and 1 second before I go there, I should mention he has a writing called John of the Cross, and I should say a couple things about them. But at the end of his life, he goes to a monastery where he had been sick. He had an infection in his leg, and he goes to this monastery, and the head of this monastery is just upset. He says, I don't want a friar that comes in sick and dying. This is going to be causing a lot of problems. There's going to be a lot of expense, but whatever. And so he didn't treat him very well at all. And after he'd gotten there, I think in late September or October, and by December it was pretty clear, early December it was pretty clear he was going to be dying. And so he asked to see the prior, the head of this order that had given him a very hard time about arriving and everything else. And he said to him, I apologize. I'm sorry for having caused you and this monastery so much difficulty. Well, the prior was so taken aback that he himself asked for forgiveness. He just had this transforming of heart. When you're exposed to somebody that's that good, it's funny how it has that effect on you. John had that effect on so many people. He had, in his writings, and I showed you that short book, The Collected Works of St. John of the Cross, it's not easy reading. And yet, he was such a spiritual man that people got moved by being exposed to him. Just as he got moved by being exposed to Sister Teresa, so we can be moved by reading him. And I think there's an interesting way in which he took suffering and he didn't debate it. He didn't say, why does God do this? He just says, well, it's part of God's plan and he knows. And he came through it. And each time. And it's almost seemed like in the suffering, he made spiritual progress each and every time. May we make, in our troubles, in our times when it's not going the way we want it, may we achieve the peace that he had. When his fellow brothers or priests or monks, whatever, after he had been kicked out a couple of times, as they were being harassed, he told them not to worry about it. It'll be okay. Everything will be okay. And it's not like everything will be okay and you won't suffer. It's like it's all a part of God's plan. Can we accept God's plan? Let's try. Let's try to have that peace that gives us a joy inside, that gives us an appreciation of nature and of the creation. And he was perhaps more appreciation of more in appreciation of nature than even St. Francis, who's always put in the garden because he's holding a bird and all that kind of imagery. But he saw God's work in everything. May we do the same, and may we be blessed this day. Thanks.